As Catholics, we often hear about the devil and his influence, but how often do we really, delve into what that actually means?
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be unpacking some fascinating writings from Father Gabriele Amorth,
Right.
one of those prominent exorcists,
Absolutely.
to better understand
Yeah.
the demonic and the crucial role our faith plays in protecting us.
I think what makes Father Amorth's work so compelling is that he doesn't just present a collection of spooky stories,
Right. Yeah.
He connects his experiences as an exorcist to the core teachings of the church.
Mm-hmm.
It's a powerful reminder that the battle between good and evil is real, and it's being fought for our souls.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by that idea of spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
But before we get into the intense stuff, I think it's important to lay the groundwork.
Yeah.
What exactly does the church teach about Satan and these demonic forces?
Father Amorth is very clear about that. He reminds us that Satan, despite all the imagery we might have in our minds, is a fallen angel. He's a pure spirit, incredibly intelligent, but corrupted by pride and his rebellion against God.
So not a red guy with a pitchfork.
Right. Those images are just representations. What makes him truly dangerous is his spiritual nature and his unrelenting hatred for God and humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just Satan, of course. There's a whole hierarchy of demons, each with its own role in tempting and tormenting us, trying to lead us away from God.
That brings up an interesting point. Are all these terms, Satan, Lucifer, Beelzebul, devils, demons, are they all the same thing?
That's something I found fascinating in Father Amorth's writings. He doesn't get bogged down in the semantics. He uses the terms somewhat interchangeably, focusing more on the core concept of evil spirits who have rejected God and are actively working against his plan.
That makes sense. So how do these demonic forces actually operate in the world?
Yeah.
Is it all fire and brimstone and dramatic possessions, or is it more subtle than that?
That's where Father Amorth makes a really important distinction between what he calls ordinary and extraordinary demonic activity. Okay.
Ordinary demonic activity is something we all experience. It's the temptation to sin, those whispers that try to pull us away from God's will.
Right.
It's the everyday struggle we face as Catholics to choose good over evil.
And extraordinary demonic activity, that's where things get more intense, right?
Yes, that's where we see things like possession, vexation, obsession, and infestation. But what's crucial here is that Father Amorth emphasizes that this extraordinary activity usually requires human consent.
Okay.
We're not just helpless puppets being manipulated by demons.
So we have a choice in this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He often points to involvement in the occult as a way people unknowingly open themselves up to this kind of influence. It's like giving the demonic permission to enter.
I think a lot of people might hear that and worry that they've somehow accidentally invited demonic influence into their lives. Is there any hope for someone who's been drawn into that darkness?
Father Amorth tells a powerful story about Cassie Bernal, an American teenager who was deeply involved in the occult.
She was contemplating harming her own parents, really drawn into a world of darkness. But ultimately, she found redemption through her faith.
That's a truly remarkable story.
It is.
It seems even in those extreme cases, there's always a chance to turn back to God.
Exactly. It highlights the power of choice. No matter how far we stray, God's mercy is always available. And it underscores the importance of nurturing a strong faith. It's like building a spiritual fortress that can withstand those attacks.
This is all so incredibly insightful, but I have to ask, for those who are already experiencing extraordinary demonic influence, what can be done? Isn't this where exorcism comes in?
Yes, and Father Amorth provides a really balanced perspective on exorcism. He's very clear that it's not some Hollywood spectacle.
Right.
It's a specific ritual designed to expel demonic influence and liberate the possessed person. It's a deeply spiritual process.
So it's not about priests yelling at demons in a dark room.
Well, it's certainly not for entertainment. Father Amorth emphasizes the importance of faith for both the exorcist and the person undergoing the exorcism. And he acknowledges the historical misuse of exorcism, pointing to its recent revival as a sign that the church is taking this battle seriously once again.
What about all the talk about the old versus the new ritual of exorcism? Does he weigh in on that debate?
He mentions it, but doesn't get sidetracked by the specifics. I think what's most important to him is that faith is at the heart of it, regardless of the particular ritual. He sees faith as the key weapon in this spiritual battle.
And when he talks about faith, what does he specifically mean?
Father Amorth is a firm believer in the power of prayer, especially the Rosary, as a direct weapon against evil. He sees it as a way to tap into God's grace, a source of strength and protection against the demonic. But he's also clear that it's not just about reciting prayers, it's about cultivating a life centered on Christ.
So it's about living out our faith in every aspect of our lives.
Exactly. He stresses the importance of regular participation in the sacraments and staying in a state of grace as powerful safeguards against demonic influence. And he even talks about sacramentals, things like blessed salt, water, and oil.
A lot of people might wonder if those are just superstitions. What's his take on that?
He's very clear that sacramentals are not magic charms.
Right.
They have protective power, but their effectiveness is directly tied to our faith.
Okay.
They're channels of God's grace. It's the faith behind them that matters. But there's another powerful force in this battle that I think we need to talk about.
You're talking about Mary, right? I've always been fascinated by her role in all of this.
Father Amorth places immense importance on Mary's intercession against demonic forces. He often refers to her title, the one who crushed the head of the serpent, as evidence of her power. He believes that devotion to Mary provides immense spiritual protection.
I'd love to hear more about that. Does he share any specific examples of Mary's intercession in these situations?
There's one story he tells about a possessed nun who was relentlessly tormented.
Wow.
But found solace and protection through Mary's intercession. It's a powerful testament to her role in this spiritual battle.
So even in the most difficult moments, Mary's presence can bring hope and strength.
Exactly. That's the message Father Amorth conveys, and it's a truly comforting thought.
This is all so insightful, but what does it mean for us? For everyday Catholics trying to live our faith, what practical advice does Father Amorth offer?
He encourages us to make prayer, especially the Rosary, a regular part of our lives. Frequent participation in the sacraments is crucial, as is cultivating a deep devotion to Mary. He also cautions against dabbling in occult practices, warning that things like fortune-telling or Ouija boards can open doors to demonic influence.
So it's about staying close to God, making our faith a living reality, and avoiding anything that might weaken our spiritual defenses.
That's a great way to put it. He also emphasizes that if we're experiencing any type of spiritual distress, we should reach out to a priest or a spiritual director.
Okay.
Don't suffer in silence. There's help available.
It's reassuring to know there are resources to turn to. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation so far. But before we wrap up part 1, there's one more fascinating aspect of demonic activity we need to explore: how Satan and his demons actually operate in the world. Father Amorth goes into some detail about the different methods they use, and that's what we'll be unpacking in part 2.
What I find particularly fascinating is how he connects these methods to the very nature of evil itself. It's not just about spooky tricks and illusions.
Right.
It's about a fundamental distortion of reality, a warping of truth that can have a profound impact on our lives.
And that distortion can manifest in some really surprising ways, even in seemingly harmless aspects of our culture. We'll delve into that as well when we return.
Absolutely. As we delve deeper into Father Amorth's insights, it's striking how he doesn't just focus on those dramatic cases of possession.
Right.
He spends a considerable amount of time discussing what he calls the ordinary action of Satan.
You mean those everyday temptations we all face, those little nudges?
Yeah.
It can lead us astray.
Yes.
I'm curious to hear how he sees that playing out in our lives.
He actually views these ordinary temptations as the devil's primary weapons.
Yeah.
He compares it to a slow poison.
Wow.
Those seemingly insignificant choices we make that gradually erode our relationship with God. It's a subtle but incredibly dangerous form of spiritual warfare.
It's like he's saying the devil isn't always trying to make us do something overtly evil.
Right.
He's trying to chip away at our faith.
Exactly.
Bit by bit.
Exactly. He uses the analogy of the serpent in the Garden of Eden.
Right.
Whispering doubts into Eve's ear, tempting her with forbidden knowledge. It's about distorting our perception of reality.
Yeah.
Making us question God's goodness and his plan for us.
That makes me think about how we often hear about the dangers of the occult, but wouldn't this apply to anything that leads us away from God?
That's a really insightful connection. Father Amorth is definitely concerned about the rise of the occult and New Age practices, things like fortune-telling, tarot cards.
Yeah, and even certain alternative medicine practices that he sees as blurring the lines between the spiritual and physical in a dangerous way. He's particularly wary of anything that involves invoking spirits or seeking power outside of God's will.
So it's not about condemning everything that falls outside of traditional practices,
Right.
but about being discerning
Yes,
and recognizing the potential for spiritual harm.
precisely. He's not saying all alternative medicine is bad,
Okay.
but he stresses the importance of understanding the source of the power or healing being sought.
Right.
Is it coming from God or is it something else entirely?
Yeah.
That discernment is key. But he also expresses concern about aspects of modern culture that promote a materialistic and hedonistic worldview, the kind that prioritizes instant gratification and pleasure above all else.
I can definitely see how that creates a spiritual void that could leave people more vulnerable to these subtle forms of demonic influence.
Exactly. He talks about how the breakdown of traditional family structures, the increasing isolation people feel, all of these things create cracks in our spiritual armor, making it easier for the demonic to exploit our weaknesses.
Right.
And what I find really thought-provoking is that he also calls out those within the church who downplay the reality of the demonic.
That's interesting. It seems like he's saying that denying the existence of evil doesn't make us safer.
Right.
It actually makes us more vulnerable.
Exactly. He's a firm believer that knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm.
The more we understand how Satan operates, the better equipped we are to resist him.
Okay.
We can't be naive about the spiritual battle that's raging around us.
So it's not about living in fear, but about being informed,
Yeah.
vigilant, and making sure our faith is strong enough to withstand those attacks.
Exactly.
You know, one thing that really stood out to me in Father Amorth's writings was how he uses personal anecdotes
Yes.
from his own experience as an exorcist.
Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
I agree. Those stories are so powerful. They really bring these concepts to life, reminding us that this isn't just some abstract theological debate. This is a real battle with real consequences.
Do you have a particular story that resonated with you?
There's one he tells about a young woman who was completely obsessed with death and the occult,
Oh, wow.
even to the point of self-harm.
Wow.
She had gotten drawn into this darkness through music,
Mm-hmm.
books,
Mm-hmm.
even online communities.
Yeah.
It's a chilling reminder of how easy it is to be lured into these dangerous paths, especially in today's world with the internet giving us access to all sorts of dark and disturbing content.
It makes you think twice about what we allow into our minds and hearts, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And Father Amorth's point is that we can't just dismiss these things as harmless entertainment. They
Right.
can have a real impact on our spiritual well-being.
Yeah.
He's not saying we need to be afraid of everything, but
Right.
that we need to be discerning
Right.
to recognize the potential for danger and make choices that protect our souls. It goes back to that idea of building up our spiritual defenses through prayer, the sacraments, and a deep lived faith.
This has been an incredible exploration so far. Before we move on to the world of exorcisms in part 3,
Okay.
I'm really curious about something.
Yeah.
Are there any specific signs that someone might be under demonic influence? How can we tell if it's something we need to be concerned about?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and one that a lot of people ask.
Right.
Father Amorth actually provides a fairly detailed list of symptoms and behaviors that could point to demonic activity.
Okay.
But he's very cautious,
Yeah.
emphasizing that many of these signs can mimic psychological or physical problems.
Right.
So it's crucial to rule out natural causes first.
So we shouldn't assume every headache or bout of depression is a demonic attack.
Right. It's important to approach this with prudence and discernment,
Mhm.
but he does describe certain behaviors that, when combined with other factors, could raise a red flag.
I'd be really interested to hear more about those red flags.
But-
What should we be looking for? Is it all about levitating beds and speaking in tongues?
Right.
Or are there more subtle signs?
It's definitely not always as dramatic as what we see in movies.
Okay.
He mentions a strong aversion to anything sacred as one possible sign.
Okay.
This could manifest as an inability to enter a church,
Right.
intense discomfort around religious objects,
Mhm.
or even violent reactions to holy water or a crucifix. It's like the very things that should bring comfort to a Catholic actually trigger a negative response.
Oh, that's so unsettling. What else does he mention?
He also talks about a kind of supernatural knowledge that sometimes accompanies this aversion to the sacred.
Mhm.
For example, the possessed person might suddenly reveal information they couldn't have known naturally, things about the exorcist's past, hidden sins of others,
Oh.
or even details about future events.
That's chilling.
Yeah.
Are there any physical symptoms he associates with demonic influence?
He mentions things like unexplainable illnesses, sudden and dramatic changes in appearance or behavior, and even instances of superhuman strength.
Wow.
He even describes cases of people levitating or speaking in languages they've never learned.
I have to admit, that sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
But he's saying these things actually happen.
Yes, and he's witnessed them firsthand.
Wow.
But he stresses that these extreme manifestations are not the norm.
Okay.
Often the signs are much more subtle and insidious.
Right.
He talks about sudden fits of rage, deep depression, suicidal thoughts,
Right.
and even inexplicable problems in relationships or finances.
So it's not always about the big scary stuff.
Right.
Sometimes it's about a gradual unraveling of a person's life that doesn't have any other explanation.
Exactly.
That's really frightening to think about.
It is, and that's why he emphasizes the need for vigilance and a solid foundation of faith. But the good news is that even in those difficult situations, there's hope. And that's what we'll explore in part 3 as we delve into the world of exorcism and the power of God's grace to overcome even the darkest forces.
That last part, I have to admit, left me with chills. The idea that demonic influence can manifest in such subtle ways is pretty unsettling.
Right.
But I'm also really curious to learn more about the process of exorcism. Seems like we're stepping into a whole other realm now.
You're right. It's a fascinating and complex topic. And I think Father Amorth's perspective is particularly valuable because he approaches it with such a blend of experience and theological depth. He doesn't shy away from the dramatic aspects of exorcism, but he always brings it back to the core truths of our faith.
So if we suspect that someone, we know might be experiencing demonic influence, what's the first step? Should we be rushing out to find an exorcist?
Father Amorth is very clear on this point. He urges caution and prudence above all else.
Right.
The first step is always to consult with a priest or spiritual director, someone with the knowledge and experience to discern the true nature of the problem. Remember, not all spiritual distress is demonic in nature.
That's a good point. It's important to rule out any psychological or medical explanations before jumping to conclusions.
Yeah.
But let's say it has been determined that exorcism is necessary. What can you tell us about that process based on Father Amorth's experience?
He emphasizes that exorcism is a serious spiritual battle, not a quick fix or magical cure.
Right.
It requires faith, humility, and a willingness to confront the demonic head-on. It's not something to be taken lightly.
What does he say about the actual ritual itself? What does it involve?
He describes it as a combination of prayers, commands, and blessings, all performed in the name of Jesus Christ. The goal is to break the demon's hold over the possessed person and drive it back to hell. He also distinguishes between solemn exorcism, which is the formal public ritual performed by an ordained priest with permission from the bishop, and simple exorcisms, which are more like prayers of liberation that anyone can pray.
So we don't need special permission to pray for someone who's struggling spiritually?
Absolutely not. In fact, Father Amorth believes that everyone has the power to pray for deliverance from evil. And those prayers can be incredibly effective, especially when offered with faith and perseverance.
That's encouraging to hear. It seems like prayer really is our most powerful weapon in this battle.
He definitely believes that. And he talks about the importance of the exorcist's own faith, along with the faith of those supporting them through prayer. He sees that collective faith as a source of strength and protection.
What about the role of the exorcist? What qualities does he say are essential for someone who takes on that ministry?
He stresses the importance of holiness, humility, and a deep trust in God's power. He says an exorcist must be a person of prayer, someone who's deeply rooted in their own faith and relies completely on the grace of God to overcome the demonic.
It sounds like an incredibly demanding and even dangerous role. Is that how he describes it?
He doesn't sugarcoat it. He calls it a ministry of compassion, but also one of spiritual combat. The exorcist is facing the full force of the demonic and needs to be prepared for intense spiritual attacks.
It's certainly not a job for the faint of heart. What does he say about what happens after an exorcism? Is it always a clean break?
Right.
Or are there lingering effects?
He's very honest about the fact that it varies from case to case. Sometimes the liberation is immediate and complete, but often it's a gradual process. There can be setbacks, challenges, and a need for ongoing spiritual support.
So even after the demon is gone, the battle isn't necessarily over.
Exactly. He stresses the importance of continued spiritual guidance for those who have been liberated. The need to fill the void left by the demonic with a renewed commitment to faith and a life centered on Christ.
I think what's been most striking throughout this entire deep dive is how Father Amorth views exorcism as more than just a ritual.
Right.
It's a profound spiritual battle that requires faith, courage, and a deep understanding of the forces at play.
And as we've explored his insights, it's become clear that this isn't just about extreme cases of demonic possession. His warnings about the subtle ways evil can infiltrate our culture, his emphasis on the importance of prayer and the sacraments, and his call to live a life rooted in Christ. These are all lessons that apply to every Catholic every day.
You've given us a lot to think about today. And as Father Amorth so powerfully reminds us, the battle against evil is ongoing. It's a battle we all face, but it's a battle we can win armed with the truth, with faith, and with the unwavering support of God's grace.